The man at the front desk did not look up when Delia walked in. He kept his eyes on the screen in front of him, one hand resting on the keyboard, the other wrapped around a coffee cup, and let her stand at the marble counter for a full minute before he said, without turning, "Service entrances around back." She had not asked him anything yet. Delia Marsh was 41 years old, and she had been cleaning other people's spaces for 18 of those years. She knew what it looked like when someone decided you were invisible. She had walked through it hundreds of times in hotel hallways and executive bathrooms and the cheerful lobbies of office buildings where security guards followed her 3 steps behind and then pretended they hadn't. She had learned long ago that the decision was not about her. It was about the person making it. She did not argue with it. She did not shrink from it either. She said, "I have an 11 o'clock with your general manager. My name is Delia Marsh." The man at the front desk looked up then. He blinked, and a small recalibration happened somewhere behind his eyes, and then he said, "One moment," and reached for the phone. She stood and waited. The lobby of the Hargrove Country Club smelled of cedar and old money, the kind of scent that costs nothing to make and everything to maintain. The floors were pale limestone, the chandeliers brass and leaded glass, and on the far wall hung a painting of a man on a horse that no one had looked at sincerely in 30 years. Delia looked at it now. She had always noticed the details that people with money stopped seeing. This was, in fact, how she had built her business. She was not here to apply for a housekeeping position. She had not cleaned someone else's building in 4 years. She was here because the Hargrove Country Club was on the market, carrying $3 million in deferred maintenance and a debt load that was strangling it. And through 18 years of careful, disciplined, unassuming work, she had built the capital to buy it. She had not told the man at the front desk any of this. She rarely told anyone anything before the moment the paperwork made it plain. What she had not expected was that before her meeting could begin, she would be asked to leave. That part came 11 minutes later. The woman who caused it was named Carolyn Prest. She was 53, wore her blonde hair in a rigid set, and carried a large patterned bag over one arm that cost more than Delia's first car. She came through the lobby the way women who have been members of a place for 20 years come through lobbies, expecting everything and noticing nothing. She stopped when she reached the front counter and saw Delia standing there in her good navy blazer and her pressed trousers and her careful flat-soled shoes. "Excuse me," Carolyn Prest said to the man behind the counter, not to Delia. "Is housekeeping short-staffed again? I've asked 3 times about the locker room towels." The desk clerk opened his mouth. Delia said, quietly, "I'm waiting for a meeting. I'm not on staff here." The woman looked at her then, fully and briefly, the way a person looks at a piece of furniture that has been left in an inconvenient place. "This area is for members and their guests," she said. "If you're waiting on a delivery, there's a holding area off the kitchen." "I'm here to meet with Martin Rees," Delia said. "Your general manager. I believe he's expecting me." Something shifted in her expression, not embarrassment, not quite, but the recognition that a correction might be coming and that she did not like corrections. "Martin doesn't take outside meetings here on Tuesday mornings," she said. "We have a board breakfast." She turned back to the desk clerk. "Please make sure she's directed to the appropriate area," she said, and then she walked away, her heels clicking a clean, decisive rhythm across the limestone, and did not look back. The desk clerk had the decency to look uncomfortable. He said, "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. Let me just call upstairs again." "It's all right," Delia said. She said it in the same tone she had used for 18 years when she encountered this kind of thing. Steady, without edges, carrying nothing it didn't need to. "Please tell Mr. Rees that something came up and I'll be in touch to reschedule." She picked up her bag from the counter and walked back out through the glass and brass doors into the October morning, and she did not look back either. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 3 minutes. Not to compose herself, she was already composed. She sat because she was running a calculation, and calculations deserved stillness. The Hargrove Country Club was asking $4.2 million. Its debt was $2.9. Its deferred maintenance, if her contractor's walkthrough from the previous Thursday was accurate, was closer to $2.6 than the $3 million in the listing. The dining room kitchen had not been upgraded since the early 2000s. The spa wing's HVAC was failing. The member rolls had dropped by 31% over 5 years, and the board was fractured and embarrassed and trying to sell quietly before the local business press noticed. None of that had changed in the last 15 minutes. She called her attorney, a deliberate, careful woman named Iris, who had been with Delia's company since the early days and said, "Let's move the offer timeline up." She had been planning to wait another week. She had just moved the timeline up. If you've ever watched someone quietly absorb a public humiliation and walk away without a word, without tears, without any visible reaction at all, you may have wondered whether they were wounded or whether they simply didn't care. The truth, for most people who have lived the way she had lived, is neither of those things. What they are is busy. They are running the numbers. They are thinking about the next thing they are going to do. Delia was born in a place called Whitmore Heights, which was the kind of name they gave to neighbourhoods that were neither white nor elevated, and she had grown up the second of 4 children in a house with a roof that leaked in 2 places and a mother who worked double shifts at a laundry service and still brought home less than $1,000 a week. Her father had died when she was 9, quietly and completely, the way poor men die of things that rich men survive. A heart attack in his sleep that no one had seen coming because he hadn't been to a doctor in 3 years. She had watched her mother grieve and then go back to work the following Monday because there was no other option. And she had decided, at the age of 9, that she was going to understand money in a way that her parents had not been allowed to understand it. She started working at 16. Retail, then a hotel laundry, then a cleaning crew for a company that serviced corporate offices downtown. She was fast and thorough, and she noticed things. She noticed that the subcontractors for the office cleaning company were making $12 an hour while the company billed the offices $45. She noticed that the woman who managed 2 of the crews drove a car that cost $60,000. She noticed that no one ever showed up to supervise a job site to make sure it had been done correctly, and that the offices were starting to complain. At 23, she took a loan from her mother's church credit union and formed her own company. 5 employees, 2 commercial accounts, and a contract with 1 small hotel downtown. She cleaned every site herself for the first 8 months. She showed up to every job with a flashlight and checked baseboards and window ledges and the undersides of toilet rims, and she paid her people $17 an hour and drove a 7-year-old Honda, and the accounts grew. By the time she was 30, she had 40 employees and 14 commercial accounts. By 35, she had 200 employees and a residential division and a corporate account with a regional hospital network that paid, monthly, what her mother had made in 3 years of double shifts. She never bought anything she could not pay for. She never took on debt that she had not modelled out by hand on paper first. She kept a reserve account that she had not touched in 11 years. And when she started to think about what she would do with the money that was now sitting in accounts she still found mildly astonishing, she thought about real estate. Not houses, buildings, the kind that other people maintained for other people, because they didn't understand what it cost to let the maintenance slide. The Hargrove Country Club was the 4th property she had evaluated this year. It was by far the most interesting. She had spent 6 weeks running the numbers quietly, through her attorney and her accountant and a property consultant named Theo, who had looked at the HVAC report and shaken his head with the specific grief of a man who loves old buildings and cannot understand why their owners let them die. The deal was there. The deal had been there for a while. Delia had been in no hurry because hurrying was how you overpaid. She called Iris from the parking lot and said, "Submit the offer this afternoon. Full ask, clean terms, 30-day close." Iris said, "I thought we were going in below ask." "We were," Delia said. "We're not anymore." She did not explain why. She didn't need to. What she knew, and what the board of the Hargrove Country Club did not yet know, was that there was another interested party circling the property. A restaurant group from a city 2 hours north that wanted to convert the main building into an event venue and raise the spa wing. The board hated that offer. They were stalling. They wanted a buyer who would preserve the building and maintain some version of its character. A full-price, clean terms offer from a local buyer, with no conversion plans, would land differently than anything the restaurant group could put on the table. Delia knew this because she had done her homework. She always did her homework. She drove back to her office, which was in a building she owned in a neighbourhood no one had been paying attention to until 2 years ago, and she sat at her desk and reviewed the offer terms one more time and then signed where Iris had marked, and the offer went in at 3:47 that afternoon. Martin Rees called her at 9:15 the next morning. He was the kind of man who had been embarrassed before he picked up the phone, which she could hear in the first seconds of his voice, the slightly too careful diction, the unnecessary formality. He said he was so sorry about the confusion yesterday morning. He had been pulled into an early board meeting and his assistant had not properly flagged the appointment, and he hoped she hadn't been inconvenienced. Not at all, Delia said, because it was true. She had not been inconvenienced. She had been informed. He cleared his throat. He said he understood she had submitted an offer and that the board was very interested in her proposal, and that he wanted to schedule a time to discuss. Of course, Delia said. I'm available Thursday afternoon. She went to that meeting in the same navy blazer and the same flat-soled shoes, and this time when she arrived at the front desk, the young man behind the counter said, Ms. Marsh, Mr. Reese is expecting you, and stood up from his chair and walked her to the elevator himself. The boardroom was on the second floor. 8 people sat around a table of dark polished wood, most of them in the neighbourhood of 60, most of them in expressions that fell somewhere between cautious and grateful. The general manager introduced her and then sat back down, which was the right thing to do. He understood already that she was the most important person in the room. She walked them through the offer. Clean terms, full price, no conversion. Her plan was to address the deferred maintenance over 18 months, retain the existing staff, and reposition the club's membership structure to be more accessible to a broader applicant pool. She had brought Theo's maintenance report, annotated, with a remediation timeline and cost projections broken down by quarter. She had also brought a 1-page summary of her company's financial position, prepared by Gerald, that showed 11 consecutive years of profit and a reserve account that had not moved below 7 figures since the end of her second year in real estate. She set it on the table without comment and didn't ask anyone to look at it. They all looked at it. There was a long silence when she finished talking, the kind of silence that happens in rooms where people have been hoping, for longer than they will admit, that someone is going to say something sensible. One of the board members, a man with silver hair and the slightly glazed look of someone who had been to too many of these meetings and not enough of the right ones, said, "And what is your background in hospitality, Ms. Marsh?" "Facilities management," she said. 18 years. I understand what it costs to maintain a building correctly, and I understand what it costs when you don't." She tapped the maintenance report. "Your HVAC remediation is about 4 months away from becoming an emergency rather than a scheduled repair. Your kitchen equipment is operating on waivers from the county health department. Your window seals in the east dining room have been letting water in for at least 2 seasons, and you have microbial growth beginning in the wall cavity behind the butler's pantry." She said all of this in the same tone she had used for 18 years, steady, without edges, carrying only the facts. "None of this is beyond repair. All of it gets more expensive the longer it waits." The silver-haired man nodded, slowly, the way people nod when they have been told something they already knew and had been hoping someone else would handle. A woman at the far end of the table, the board treasurer, a compact woman with reading glasses pushed up into her natural hair, said, "The remediation timeline you're proposing, 18 months, is that your own estimate or your contractor's?" "My contractor's," Delia said. "He's walked 4 properties of comparable age for me. His estimates have come in within 5% on all 4. And the kitchen renovation. That's not in the maintenance report." "No," Delia said. "The health department waivers are technically compliant. The kitchen is operating legally. I intend to upgrade it regardless because the people working in it deserve equipment that works and because the food is what will bring members back. I've built the kitchen renovation into my 18-month budget at the front of the timeline." The treasurer made a note. She looked at Delia over the top of her reading glasses with the expression of a woman who had been asking questions in rooms like this for years and was not accustomed to receiving answers that were both specific and true. Something shifted in her posture, very slightly, in the direction of respect. "When would you expect to open the dining room?" she asked. "Week 18 if the kitchen comes in on schedule," Delia said. "Week 20 if it doesn't. I've built both scenarios into the projections." He, who had said almost nothing since the introductions, cleared his throat and said, "The membership restructuring you mentioned, what does that look like, specifically?" "The current structure screens for legacy connections," Delia said. "Sponsorships, referral requirements, a fee structure that's high enough to be prohibitive for people who aren't already embedded in a particular financial network." She kept her voice even. "I intend to simplify the sponsorship requirement and establish a tiered fee structure that gives the club access to a much larger applicant pool. The building's bones are exceptional. The location is excellent. What it has been missing is a reason for new people to feel welcome in it. Nobody said anything for a moment. He looked at his hands, then back at her. Some of our existing members may have concerns about the character of the club changing. Some of them may, Delia said. The ones who have been watching the member rolls drop by 31% over 5 years may be willing to consider that the character has already changed, and not for the better. That sat in the room the way a plain fact sits, firmly, without apology, taking up the space it needed. The vote was 3 days later. She was not in the room for it. She drove to her mother's house that afternoon and helped her reorganize the kitchen cabinets, a task her mother had been putting off since the spring, and they talked about Delia's nieces who were doing well and her mother's neighbour who was not, and the television show her mother had discovered on a streaming service and could not stop watching, and at no point did Delia mention the vote. Her mother knew better than to ask. She had watched her daughter learn to wait a long time ago. There was one moment, late that afternoon, when Delia's mother set down a stack of baking dishes and said, "You've got something on your mind." Delia said, "I always have something on my mind. Something specific." She looked at her mother, who had worked double shifts at a laundry service for 17 years and never once complained about it, who had gone back to work on the Monday after her husband died because there was no other option and no one was going to come and offer her one, who had pressed a $200 check drawn on the church credit union into Delia's hand at 23 and said, with the certainty of a woman who rarely said anything she didn't mean, "You know what you're doing." "There's a building," Delia said. Her mother nodded, once the way she always nodded at information she had already suspected. "Is it a good building?" "It's been neglected," Delia said. "But yes, it's a good building." Her mother picked up the baking dishes again and began fitting them into the cabinet in the order she had decided they belonged. Largest to smallest, handles aligned. "Then it'll be fine," she said. "You know how to take care of things." Delia handed her the next dish without being asked. The offer was accepted on a Friday evening. Iris called at 6:47. Delia was still at her desk. She said, "Thank you," and hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet of her own office, in the building she owned, in the neighbourhood no one had been paying attention to, and she thought about the parking lot where she had sat 3 minutes in her car doing math. She thought about her mother going back to work on that Monday. She thought about a laundry at 16, a credit union loan at 23, a flashlight and a toilet rim and $17 an hour when the market was paying 12. She did not feel triumphant. She felt like herself. She locked up and drove home and made a pot of rice and watched the same show her mother had been talking about because it was, in fact, quite good. The closing was scheduled for 26 days later, on a Tuesday, because that was when all the principals could be assembled, and because Delia's attorney had found it quietly funny that it was a Tuesday, the same day of the week as the board breakfast that had resulted in her being directed away from the front counter. Delia did not find this funny exactly. She found it interesting. She was always interested in the way that time organized itself around certain kinds of justice, quietly, without announcement, the way a building settles into its foundation when you stop ignoring what it needs. The morning of the closing, she arrived at the title company's offices at 5 minutes to 9 and sat in the conference room with Iris and Theo and her accountant, a meticulous, sparse-spoken man named Gerald, who had been doing her books since she had books worth doing, and they went through the documents in the order they had been organized, and she signed her name in the places designated, and the building passed to her. The woman who had redirected her in the lobby was not present, not part of the transaction in any formal sense, had no role in the sale, and was not likely aware that the closing was happening that morning. She was a member of the club, not a board member, and her authority in the lobby that Tuesday 3.5 weeks ago had been, in the end, exactly what it appeared to be, the confidence of a person who assumed she knew what she was looking at and was wrong. That was the end of her involvement in this story. Not because she was punished, not because she was exposed in any public way, but because she was simply not relevant to the outcome. She had tried to redirect a woman who could not be redirected. She had not changed anything except the timeline. Delia had a policy about people like her. She thought about them exactly as much as they merited, which was to say, briefly and once, and then she moved on to what was actually in front of her. What was in front of her now was a building. She drove to the Hargrove Country Club that afternoon with Theo and walked the property for 2 hours. They started in the basement where the mechanical systems lived and where the evidence of years of deferred attention was most legible. The HVAC units held together with purchase time, the water heater banks running past their rated lifespan, the drainage situation in the northeast corner of the foundation that had been rerouted rather than repaired at some point in the previous decade. Theo made notes. Delia made notes. They were not distressed by what they found. This was what they had modelled. Theo had a habit, when he was working through a building for the first time after a purchase, of narrating his notes quietly to himself. Not to Delia, just into the air in front of him, as though the building could hear and he wanted it to know he was paying attention. She had noticed this on the first property they had worked together, and she had never mentioned it because she understood the impulse. Buildings responded to attention. That was the whole point. Drain line here is probably early 90s work, he said, crouching near the northeast corner with a flashlight. Whoever did it knew what they were doing, but they were working around something original that they didn't want to pull out. See this here? He directed the light at a joint where two eras of pipe met and been sealed with a compound that had, over time, developed a slow and quiet ambition to fail. This is going to want to come out. All of it. Back to original. Add it to the list, she said. It's already on the list. They came up through the kitchen, and Delia stood in the middle of it and thought about the people who had been working in this space for years, the cooks and the dishwashers and the prep staff who had made do with equipment that was past its useful life, because no one with the authority to replace it had thought it was worth the money. A range on the south wall had a burner sealed with tape and a handwritten label that said, "Out of order," in a hand that had become practiced at writing those three words, the letters even and unhurried, the signature of someone who had been asking for a long time and had stopped expecting an answer. She thought about a lot of things in a kitchen. Kitchens were where she had always done her clearest thinking. She told Theo she wanted the kitchen renovation at the front of the remediation schedule. "That's going to push the dining room opening," he said. "That's fine," she said. "The people in the kitchen need to work in a functional kitchen. The members can wait an extra 6 weeks. Theo made a note and did not argue, because he had worked with her before and he understood that when she said something in that particular tone, the conversation was settled. They walked the spa wing, the east dining room, the main ballroom with its vaulted ceiling and its 3 decades of accumulated small damage, and the grounds, which had been maintained with more care than the interior, and which still had the bones of something beautiful. There was a stand of old oaks along the eastern edge of the property that Delia stopped to look at for a long moment. She had not noticed them on her earlier walkthrough. "Those have to be 100 years old," she said. "At least," Theo said. She looked at them for another moment. Then she said, "Nothing comes out near those trees. Whatever we put on this property, those stay." She meant the oaks. She also meant something else, the part of this place that had outlasted the people who had stopped paying attention to it, the part that had kept growing on its own terms, regardless. She thought about what you could build when you stopped ignoring what something needed. The staff meeting happened a week after closing. She gathered every member of the existing team in the ballroom because it was the largest indoor space and because it was the appropriate room for a meeting about the future of a building. There were 47 people in front of her, cooks and waitstaff and groundskeepers and front desk staff and the 2 women who had managed housekeeping for the club for 11 and 14 years, respectively. They were nervous in the way that employees are always nervous when a building changes hands. She had been that nervous once. She understood it. She had been in this position enough times to know that what people needed at the beginning was not a speech. They needed information, specific and true, delivered by someone who was not going to waste their time. She had prepared accordingly. She told them her plans for the building. She told them the kitchen was being renovated first. She told them she intended to maintain all current staffing through the renovation period and that her plan was to grow the team, not reduce it, as the membership restructuring brought new members in. She told them the wage structure would be reviewed in the first 90 days with the expectation that it would go up, not down. She told them her maintenance and renovation contractor had already been retained and that the work would start in 3 weeks and that the crew would be respectful of their workspace and their schedules. She paused at that point and looked at the room. 47 people. Most of them had been working in this building for years, some of them for longer than a decade, in the quiet and often unacknowledged way that people work in buildings when the people who own the buildings are not paying much attention. She had read their personnel files. She had looked at the maintenance request logs, the shift schedules, The supply orders, the letters to management that had been filed and not acted upon. She knew more about how this building actually ran than the board that had been meeting in it every Tuesday morning for 20 years. One of the groundskeepers, a man in his 50s named Roy, who had the look of someone who had been through several of these kinds of meetings and trusted none of them, raised his hand and said, "What happens if the members don't come back?" She looked at him directly. "Some of them won't," she said. "That's been true for 5 years, regardless of who owns this building. The members we're going to attract are people who want to be in a place that's well-maintained and well-run and genuinely welcoming. That's a larger pool than the one you've been working from." He considered this. He nodded once, the nod of a man who is reserving judgment but has decided to extend provisional trust. One of the housekeeping managers, the woman who had been there 14 years, a quiet person named Vera, whose personnel file showed 18 consecutive years of above-average performance reviews and 0 disciplinary actions, raised her hand and said, "Will there be a new management structure for housekeeping specifically?" "You'll be managing housekeeping," Delia said. "Both of you. Your budgets will increase. Your reporting line will be directly to me." She held Vera's gaze for a moment. "You have been running this building's housekeeping department with about 60% of the resources it requires. That changes." Vera looked at her. She did not say anything. She pressed her lips together once, briefly, and gave a single precise nod. And Delia understood that this was not a small thing, and that Vera had been waiting for it longer than she would say. She could work with that. The first day of renovation started on a Monday 3 weeks after closing. Delia was there at 6 in the morning in work clothes and boots when the first crew arrived. Not because she needed to be there, because she had always believed that the person whose name was on the building should be present when the building started becoming what it was going to be. She walked the perimeter with the crew foreman, a practical woman named Bev who had renovated 4 of Delia's previous properties and who communicated in a terse, efficient shorthand that Delia had learned to read years ago. They looked at the kitchen walls that needed to come out, the utility lines that needed to be relocated, the ceiling tiles that concealed the aging mechanicals above them. Bev said, "This is going to be loud." "Yes," Delia said. "You going to be here?" "Most days," Delia said. Bev gave her a look that was not quite sceptical and not quite approving, and was somewhere in the middle, the look of a professional who had been told by owners before that they would be present and had watched them stop being present by week 2. She would wait and see. Delia was there most days. She had a desk in what had been the general manager's office, and she ran her cleaning company from it in the mornings and walked the renovation in the afternoons, and she learned the building the way she had learned every building she had ever owned. From the inside, slowly, with a flashlight. She found things the previous ownership had hidden and things they had simply overlooked, and she noted them all and added them to Theo's list, and the budget held because she had built the contingency to hold. This was the discipline of 18 years. You never went in without room for what you hadn't found yet. The kitchen opened in the 14th week. Delia came in on a Saturday morning, and the head cook, a quiet, focused man named Terence, who had been at the club for 9 years and who had said almost nothing in the staff meeting but had, over the 14 weeks, revealed himself to be the most competent person in the building, walked her through the new space with the specific pride of someone who has been given tools equal to his skill for the first time in a long while. He showed her the new ranges, the refrigeration, the prep station that was now the right height for the prep team, the ventilation that actually moved air the way ventilation was supposed to move air. He moved through the kitchen the way someone moves through a space they have spent years imagining might someday be different, careful and deliberate, touching things as though they were still slightly unbelievable. He said, "I've been asking for this prep station height for 6 years, she said. I know, she had read his maintenance request logs. She read everything. What she had found in Terence's file was not 1 request, but 9, submitted over 6 years, each one politely worded and thoroughly reasoned, each one marked received and then filed without action. The prep station was a back injury waiting to happen for 3 members of his prep team who were shorter than the counter required. He had documented this. He had cited the research. He had written, in his 9th and most recent request, a single sentence at the bottom that he had probably not intended for the record. "I am asking again because it is the right thing for the people I work with, and I will keep asking." She had read that sentence and thought about all the times she had written a request that went into a file somewhere and died there. She had thought about it again when she was sitting in the parking lot of this building, 3 minutes, doing math. She told him she expected the kitchen to be the best thing about the building because the food was what would bring people back. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who had been waiting a long time for someone to say the obvious and had stopped expecting that anyone would. "I've been trying to make this food for 9 years, he said. The equipment was always what it was. "Now it isn't," she said. He nodded. He turned to his new range and ran his hand along the surface of it with a proprietary, careful attention that told her everything she needed to know about what was going to come out of this kitchen. They opened the dining room to a limited membership in the 18th week. The membership restructuring had brought in 62 new applications in the preceding 2 months, more than the club had received in any comparable period in 5 years, and the wait list was, for the first time in recent memory, longer than the roster. On the day the dining room opened, Delia stood in the lobby and watched the members come through the brass and glass doors, old members and new ones, and she saw something in the building that she had not seen in the walkthroughs or the renovation months. The building was standing up straight under the attention. There was no other way to describe it. Buildings, like people, changed when someone paid them the right kind of notice. The limestone floors had been cleaned to a depth that the staff hadn't had the equipment to reach before. The chandeliers had been restored. The painting of the man on the horse had been examined by a conservator and found to be, quietly and improbably, worth preserving, and it hung on the far wall now with a small directed light on it that made a person want to look at it sincerely, possibly for the first time in 30 years. Her mother came for dinner that evening. Delia had reserved a table in the east dining room, the one with the repaired window seals and the repainted walls, and the light that came in at an angle that made everyone at the table look, briefly, like the best version of themselves. Her mother sat down and looked around the room with the slow, particular attention of a woman who had spent a lifetime noticing the quality of other people's spaces. "You fixed it," her mother said. "I fixed it," Delia said. Her mother picked up the menu and opened it and said, "I don't see prices. You're not paying." Her mother set the menu down and looked at her daughter across the table, and the expression on her face was not simple pride. It was something older and quieter, the look of a woman who had worked double shifts and gone back on Monday and watched her child learn from all of it. A look that asked nothing and already knew the answer. "The kitchen's new," Delia said. "Terence has been there 9 years. He's very good." Her mother said, "Order for me." "You know what I like." She did. They sat in the east dining room of the Hargrove Country Club as the evening light came through the sealed windows, and they ate food that Terence had cooked with skill and care, and the right equipment at last. And around them, the dining room filled with the particular warmth of a space that has been brought back to what it was always supposed to be. There is something that happened to her over the 18 years she spent building a business that is difficult to name, but it has to do with knowing the value of a thing that other people have stopped seeing. She learned it with buildings first, learned to walk through a space other people had given up on and see, under the neglect, what was worth keeping and what it would cost to keep it. She learned it because of her mother, who had never given up on anything in her life, and she learned it because of the credit union and the flashlight and the $17 an hour and every job site she had shown up to with more care than the contract required. She had not walked into the Hargrove Country Club to prove anything to the woman who had directed her toward the kitchen entrance. She had walked in to do business. The snub, the misdirection, the shoes clicking across the limestone, none of it changed the nature of the thing she was there to accomplish. The building was worth keeping. The people working in it were worth keeping. The oaks along the eastern edge were worth keeping. None of that had changed when she walked back out to the parking lot and sat 3 minutes doing math. She had simply returned with the paperwork. Her mother took a piece of bread from the basket and buttered it with the attention that women who have spent their lives feeding other people bring to a good piece of bread. And she said, without looking up, "Your father would have liked this place." Delia thought about her father, who had died of a heart attack in his sleep at a table in a different kind of house, before anyone had paid him the right kind of attention. "Yes," she said, "he would have." The evening settled around them, warm and unhurried, and Terence's food was very good, and the light through the east windows was exactly right, and the oaks outside stood in the dusk, as they had stood for 100 years, unbothered, still growing. Do you know someone who built something from nothing, quietly, without announcement? If you do, let them know in the comments that you see them. And if you want to stay close to stories like this one, there's more waiting for you here. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes.